In this video, we're going to show you how to soften the shadow in the water that was brought in along with the people cutout, as we saw in the last video. So we're going to use the quick select tool, which can be accessed with W as a shortcut. And then we're going to just select the shadow in the water. Okay, so we actually don't want to select these areas that overlap with the cutout itself. So we're trying to hold down the O key and then click on these areas that we want to subtract from the selection. Okay, so when we're done, we can basically save this selection. So we can go to select and then save selection, and then we can just type in a name and say shadow in case we need it later. Say okay, and then now we're going to show you another way of creating a mask. So last time it was black and white. Black was the foreground color that allows what's underneath that layer to show through. White was the background color that conceals what's underneath that layer. So this time we're going to paint a new layer with gray color, so that whatever it shows through is halfway concealed, so it's kind of a semi-transparent, or the opacity is like 50% or 70% depending on the level of the gray tone you're using. So in this case, we're going to create a new layer, and then we're going to keep this selection, and then we're going to paint with the brush tool. So we can use the brush tool, and again, by holding down the O key and right click on the mouse, we can actually adjust the diameter of the brush, and then if we go up and down, we can adjust the hardness of the brush. So in this case, we're just gonna kind of go in and try not to emphasize the edge too much, because before this edge was too sharp, too obvious. So we can avoid touching upon that edge will be helpful. Let's just uncheck the family. You can see how the shadow is kind of spotty. So let's just go in and kind of fill it up a bit more. Okay, so now we're going to drag this layer and then drag it to the mask icon down here, so it becomes a mask right there. Now we're going to click on this family layer and create a new layer by dragging it down to the plus sign on the folder. And for one of these copies, we're going to actually delete the shadow. So let's see, we're going to delete the shadow on this one. So just select that layer, hit delete. You can see how if we move this mask right here down to the family layer, which still has the shadow, and then we delete this layer that we used to create the mask, you can see how now there's no shadow at all. And then as soon as we turn on this layer, you can see how the shadow is a lot more subtle right now. So let's do Control D to deselect. You can see how the shadow is more graceful instead of seeing a straight line across. And then we're going to now create drop shadow. We're going to right click on this layer. Actually, we're going to just go down here and then just select drop shadow. And then this is where we can adjust the sun's angle and everything. And then the opacity of the shadow, 60% looks good, so we can just say okay. And once we've done that, we can go to the drop shadow here and then kind of check it out. It's kind of subtle, and then if we right click on it, we can go to where it says create layer. So now we just say okay there. We just created the shadow, the drop shadow as a separate layer. So you can see how this layer is now showing up as being separate. So then we can use the move tool. You can see how if we click on the shadow layer, we can drag the shadow. Actually, we want to drag the shadow. Want to drag the shadow around. So in this case, we can then start transforming the shadow. We're going to do Control T. And then when you hit Control again and click on one of the corner, we can start to distort it by holding down the Control key and dragging one corner at a time. So you can see how we can also move it up if you release the Control key. Maybe this one wants to go up a little bit more. Okay, drag that corner down, hold the Control key so you can modify that corner to distort the shadow. Okay. So, so this is kind of how you go about distorting the shadows. If it looks good, then you can hit enter. In this case, the shadow still looks a bit too much. So we can again adjust the opacity again and maybe make it 50%. That looks a lot better now. The other thing is that we created sort of this other layer without the shadow at the bottom, so we can again replicate the drop shadow command, and then just say okay, and then check to see if you've created it, and then we can right click here and then go to create layer. So now we create another layer of drop shadow, and we actually want to bring it up to be above the family cutout. And then we want to tone down the opacity so that we can kind of see how the sun, now it looks as if the sun is coming from slightly behind them, because the cutout looks a little bit darker. So let's just take a look at the shadow down here. Let's see. All right, so there you go. So now we have people cut out that's inserted with shadows and so on. And then I hope you guys can use this technique to start inserting trees and shadows to complete your rendering. I'll see you in the next video.